Welcome and thank you for joining me on a path to self-discovery. And in this presentation, I'm going to walk through my story of how I got from my ego to peace. And really what that means is how I got from I to we. And to start off with a little backstory, where was I before all this began? Before my journey of self-improvement started, whether it be the reading material that I'll go through, the courses that I've taken, where was I before? Well, I was where most of us start off, born into a world, into a paradigm that I had no control over, and I gathered up my information through family, friends, my parents, people around me, and began to construct this identity of I. One thing that was very draining for me was this voice we have in our head. And I'll pause for a second. You can listen to the little voice. And see, that voice for me, it would just go on and on and on and on and on. And for most of us, it's nonstop. For me, it was just obsessive. And I know there's a lot of other people that feel it to that same level of magnitude where it was just like, would do anything to turn it off. I still remember the day, I don't remember when the exact day was, but I still remember that moment where I searched if overthinking was actually a thing. Was it a clinical diagnosis? That's how draining my thought process was, and overanalyzing, and just wouldn't be quiet. Another thing I experienced in my life was cycles of feeling depressed. Now, I've never clinically been diagnosed with depression. It never intervened in my life in a way where it became a problem. I hid it really most of my life, and I knew that it wasn't me. I would go through these moments, I would go through these days where I would just feel down. And didn't necessarily need to be a certain cause, just felt down. Didn't want to be here. What does here mean? Didn't want to be in this world. And then moments would pass, and for the most part, always carried myself very happily. However, there was still this cycle that would occur. There was still these moments of feeling down that would occur, and a lot of that came from my mind that would never turn off. And like everyone else, I had days where I was happy, days where I was mad, angry, things that would upset me. And what I felt like was all I ever wanted was to be happy all the time and to be at peace. And I didn't enjoy the negative emotions, the anger, the frustration, the aggravation. And a lot of people would say, well, that's part of life. Those, you get the happy moments, you get the sad moments. I never felt complete with that. That never, I guess I could say I never accepted that to the level of where most of us will say, well, that's just life. And so I'm going to walk through my journey of how I got from all of that to a place of peace of mind, where the voice is, quiet. Does that mean I don't think at all? No. For the most part, though, I don't. For the most part, my mind is quiet, and I'll show you how I got there. Does it mean I never get angry? For the most part, I don't. I'm not invulnerable to it. Actually, prior to this recording, I got upset with a situation in my life, and it was the first time in 2 years I've actually been upset. So, of course, it still happens, but the point is, it was the first time in 2 years, not the first time in a month or in a week, or it was a moment in a day. And as I continue to explore my mind and continue to grow and reach as far as I can reach, I've discovered that there's so much more capability and possibility that we can achieve for ourselves and for those around us. And if you want to take it to the extreme, for the world. And so I'm happy to have you with me as I go through the journey of my self-discovery and really our self-discovery, because as you'll see laid out, what I've discovered for myself, I can see in anyone else. So the first material that I was presented with, and when I say presented, a friend of mine had recommended that I read this book, someone who I value a great deal. And so I started reading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. This is where I discovered who I was, the actual I. And as you can see here, the I or self of any person, a person as thinking, feeling, and willing, and distinguishing itself from the selves of others and from objects of its thought. The I is our ego. It's what separates us from everyone else. What I've learned about getting behind the ego, getting to awareness, which you could say is the overall summary of this whole presentation, is uncovering awareness. What is it? Where does it lie? Where is this conscious aspect to ourselves when we can remove the I? And as Eckhart Tolle described, it's being aware of our thoughts and being aware that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness of our thoughts. So for me, I get a visual when I say that. For me, in my mind, I see the outer shell, my body, and then I can see a layer of my thoughts. Okay, well, Eckhart Tolle is telling me that I'm behind my thoughts. I'm the awareness of my thoughts. And what I found is pretty powerful. You may be able to do it right now. Take a quick pause and, go in your mind, and I'm sure it's thinking right now, and try to get yourself to the awareness of that thought. Watch the thinking. Be aware of the thinking. Another thing that helps get to that place is meditation, which I'll discuss in a little bit. And so that was the first step, is getting to what's behind the I. Where is the true I? And so I found that that is our conscious awareness. Right? It's who we truly are when we strip down the ego. Now you can see the heading, the ego, and getting offended. So a couple indicators I found that you can highlight the ego, sense it, is getting offended. Only the ego can be offended. So if you are easily offended, or something has offended you, that's a place to look at. Why did that offend me? Right? That offense therein lies an identity that we're holding on to. Right? Only the ego can get offended. And so corresponding to that, I found that, well, only the ego needs to defend itself. So if you find yourself heavily defensive, that indicates you have a very high ego. Right? If you're defending yourself all the time, you have a high ego, a high identity of yourself. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No, there's nothing wrong. I would offer you, how is that working for you? Again, I wasn't comfortable with all the negative emotions. I found it unnecessary to always have to defend myself. I don't like being offended. Who does? Right? It leads to negative emotions. So for me, this journey was worth exploring. And the power I found in this journey was, well, it starts with me. I control that. I'm hurting myself. I'm making myself mad. I'm allowing myself to be offended. And so it starts with really getting clear about our ego, about our I, and what is that. And is the I, is the hold on our identity, or the level that we have of our identity, is that worth what it brings along? I can tell you this: the higher your ego, the lower your awareness. The lower your awareness, the lower we're actually seeing of the world around us. Literally, through visual sight, through listening, we're actually not even hearing 100% of what's being broadcast to us. So there's a whole world that opens up when one can lower the ego, because inversely, that raises our awareness, and literally a new world appears. It's a fascinating phenomenon. Now, part of the ego and part of the pain inside of us, I learned what triggered it. I learned just triggers in general. Why do we get mad? Why do we get angry? What sets us off? Well, those are the triggers. Well, how come sometimes we're in the same cycle? We keep ending up in the same situations over and over and over again. Well, that's from our pain body. And again, this is from Eckhart Tolle: the accumulated pain is a negative energy field that occupies your body and mind. If you look on it as an invisible entity in its own right, you are getting quite close to the truth. It's the emotional pain body. It has two modes of being: dormant and active. And so how Eckhart Tolle describes this as, when your pain body is active, it's looking to feed itself. And it gets fed off of the negativity that reinforces the pain that's inside us. The triggers are the things that set us off. And what's fascinating about these triggers is they all come from a moment of time that happened prior, usually years past. Usually when we're a younger child, early teens, and a moment happened and we never got complete with it. We are never actually settled with it. And now moving forward, every time a similar moment happens, we get triggered. We get mad again. We get upset. We get angry. It's not because of the circumstance that happened at the time in the future, or the now. It's happening because of an unresolved moment in the past. And so what's fascinating is when we address those triggers and we complete that moment in the past that caused it in the first place, well, the trigger goes away. It's no longer a trigger. You can no longer get upset at that same circumstance. It really is a fascinating thing. And again, we don't have to go through life with these. You don't have to go through life hiding from these certain scenarios, or are being dominated by these certain scenarios that get you upset. They can be addressed. And that all falls in line with communication with ourselves and communications with other people. Something that Eckhart Tolle wrote in his book that really had me take a serious look at this is he described how a pain body needs to feed itself. And he used the analogy of people driving on roadways, and said that if two people with high pain bodies are entering an intersection, or entering a particular circumstance that could end in an accident, well, two people with higher pain bodies has a much higher likelihood to actually get into the accident. Subconsciously, they're looking to feed their pain body. They're looking for that negative experience. I thought to myself, I don't want to get into an accident. And then I looked at what's something that I do. Okay, well, I had a pet peeve on people taking left-hand turns. People often cut through the turn. And so at times I notice that staying within my lane, right, within the guidelines of the roadway, but I would make it a point to really quickly get to the line to cut off the person that's essentially cutting off my lane. Now, you can argue about who's right or wrong, in my defense, right? I would argue, well, I'm in my lane. They're coming into my lane, so it's their fault. Well, really, what I got present to was I was adding to the probable cause of there being an accident. I was looking to feed something inside of me. And when I got clear that I don't want to be in an accident, then I really started looking at all those situations. And I started looking at the bigger picture of those situations. And now I no longer do it. And I'm sure even saying that, there's some people that agree, some people that disagree. And again, it's not the point of whether you agree or not, or whether I was right or wrong. It's, do I want to be in an accident? That's all it really came down to. Is that good for either party involved? No. Okay. So through that awareness of it, disappeared. And you can use that for any area of life, any point that triggers you, any point that you can actually confront yourself and see, are you adding to a situation that will most likely end in a negative result? These are two distinctions that I learned, one from Eckhart Tolle with the three modalities, and the actions, to be quite honest, I can't remember if I picked that up from a book or if I put that together myself through a little over 2 years of intensely studying ourselves. I absorbed so much information. So the actions, I'm not actually sure if that came from someone or myself, but the modalities, I can most certainly give credit to Eckhart Tolle. That's where I picked that up from. And I'll start with the modalities because that made a huge impact. And again, I'm going to use a driving reference. And so the three modalities, as you can see, are acceptance, enjoyment, and enthusiasm. Those are the three modes to be in at all times. And not being in one of those three modes generally usually results into a negative mode, a negative experience. So I remember when I first picked up this material, and so I was driving, and I was behind a slower vehicle. So I'm on a one-lane roadway, double yellow, I can't go anywhere. And I decided to try this on because I was frustrated. At the time, anyone who knows me well knows I like to get from A to B. So being behind a slower vehicle is like, drives me nuts. And so I tried on this information. I said, okay, Eckhart, I'm going to give this a try. And I said, well, I am not enthused about being behind this car. I am not enjoying being behind this car. And then in a moment of clarity, I said, well, I can accept that I'm behind this car. I can accept that this is just where I am right now. I can't go anywheres. When I get to that next opportunity to get around them, or if it's the rest of my journey, I can accept this. And it was that moment where I was hooked. Because in that moment when I chose acceptance, I had an involuntary happiness that came about me. I was just smiling. I started laughing in the car. It was wild. Just came over me. And then I took those modalities and I used them everywhere else where I found myself feeling negative or frustrated or unhappy with a situation. And so it became almost like a mantra, a tool that I used. I just ingrained these three modalities, actually to the point where I wrote them on my wall so that I would always be reminded of them. And then pretty soon it just got embedded subconsciously, where I just instinctually knew to always be in one of those modes. And to finish that story, it was funny. So we were coming up to a circle, right? And circle had two lanes. And so I remember getting in the other lane, going around the car, and I'd say to myself, well, I'm enjoying passing this car. And then I got in front of the car and I remember saying, well, I am now enthused about being in front of this car. And I would just do that. I did that day after day after day until it became just a habit, until I didn't have to say it out loud, until I didn't have to think it. It just became part of me. And that alone, life-changing. I mean, if just stopping there, my life drastically different just from that piece. And I invite you to try it on. It's so powerful and so simple and so powerful. And then the actions, well, the actions came about from looking at circumstances and what do we have in our power to do. You see a lot of that now. So it's election year. So there's a lot of opinions, right? There's a lot of talking. There's not as much action. And that might not even be a good example because I might have just stirred up a whole lot of thoughts. It's a very polarizing topic, unfortunately. And I apologize if that reference even got you off track. The point being, though, in a circumstances, there's always 3 actions to do that will result in a positive outcome if used correctly. You can probably twist this one a little bit. So the 3 actions are acceptance, accepting the situation. And by the way, accepting is a powerful tool in and of itself. You can take that in your life in general. You can apply acceptance in virtually everything. Now, you can remove yourself from a situation. Right? Let's say you're watching something on the news, it's very negative. Well, you can turn the TV off, right? Boom, you removed yourself from it. Or you can take action to change it. We'll stay with that same analogy. You can turn the channel. It's gone. So we'll stick with TV. You can accept what's on the TV. You can remove yourself, right? Turn the TV off. Or you can change the channel. Because guess what? Sitting there yelling at the TV is not doing anything except making yourself upset. But it's making no impact whatsoever. And so those tools have been so valuable to myself, and I offer them to you. Then, from the same mentor, I finished reading Eckhart Tolle, and that was the beginning of my journey. That was the beginning of me just being obsessed with understanding ourselves. And I wanted to go further and further and further. And so I became on this quest to explore consciousness. And so the second book he recommended was The Disappearance of the Universe by Gary R. Renard. Very, very heavy and fascinating book. And this is where I learned about non-dualism. And this is also something that would shake up most people because most of the world follows a dualistic belief. And so dualism is the division of something conceptually into 2 opposite or contrasted aspects, or the state of being divided. Non-dualism in spirituality, non-dualism, also called non-duality, means not 2. 1 undivided without a second. Non-dualism primarily refers to a mature state of consciousness in which the dichotomy of I, our ego, other is transcended, and awareness is described as centerlessness and without dichotomies. Okay? I'll give you the nature of the heaviness of the book. I'm going to make that as simply put as I can. Duality is a belief that we are all separate. Our ego. You are different than me. And we're all different from each other. Non-dualism is a belief of oneness, that we're all the same, fundamentally, at a conscious level, at consciousness. That which lies behind the thoughts. So analogy I use for that is picturing a large body of water. And that body of water represents consciousness. Now, if you were to take a cup of that water, the cup allows the water to experience the world, right? Well, that cup is our body. Let's say it's a blue cup. Well, you take another cup of water. Let's say that's a yellow cup. And that yellow cup now allows that cup of water to experience the world. Well, now you have 2 different bodies. One's red, one's blue. Oh, nope, one's blue, one's yellow. I forgot my own example. one's blue, one's yellow. Every color is really irrelevant. It doesn't matter. The fact is they're 2 different colors, right? We'll say blue, yellow. And we live in a world where we're different because this blue cup is different than the yellow cup. And we fight over these differences. Very silly. And non-dualism is the belief that we are what's inside the cup, consciousness. And non-dualism is knowing that Well, the water in the blue cup is the same as the water in the yellow cup. It came from the same body of water. The only difference is the body, the cup that the water is experiencing its surroundings in. Now, take it a step further. When we die, or the cups drop and hit the ground, the water now seeps back into the ground, recedes back into the body of water. And you can extrapolate out of that metaphor what that may mean for life, life after, however you want to extrapolate that in your mind. That, as simply as I can put it at this point in time, is what would describe non-dualism. And it's a belief that I've come to subscribe to. Why? Because it makes sense. It made sense to me. When I completed this book, putting Eckhart Tolle and then putting this book together, it just made sense. I didn't have to try to figure it out. It just clicked for me. And then I went out into the world and I tested it. How did I test it? By observing, by being aware and just watching people, watching ourselves. And I still, to this day, been about 2 years later since I started these first two, I have seen it 100% be true that we're all the same. When you get past the ego, we're all the same. The mechanism that drives us all, it's all the same. So it just made sense. Now, the fact that we're in a primarily dualistic belief in this world, well, you can see where that's gotten us. We're in the same cycle, and we've been doing the same thing for about 200,000, give or take, years that we've been on this planet as Homo sapiens, as we know ourselves to be. Believing that we're all different from each other, constantly fighting, whether it be with countries, whether it be within our own backyards, whether it be within our families, fighting for these differences. Then you pick up what clears this. So go back to where I was prior. Always thinking, obsessively, experiencing negative emotions like most of us, right? Day to day, week by week, whether it's anger, whether it's hate, whether it's being upset, sad, feeling lonely. I remember times where I could be in a room of people, but yet still feel so disconnected, feel so alone. And then we go talk about the triggers to these negative moments, these things that keep enacting these negative parts. And what I found was it goes back to acceptance. Acceptance is the key to removing these triggers. Accepting people for who they are. Now, there's other fascinating tools and levels of communication that can help transform other people. But to start off, acceptance, especially when you lack those tools to influence someone or to bring about that change or transformation, you start with acceptance. And then we'll get into the levels of consciousness. Acceptance is so key, especially if you want to break out of these negative emotions, these lower levels of consciousness, which again, we'll get to in a couple minutes. And what's acceptance? The action of consenting to receive or undertake something offered. That's how we defined it. Love, an intense feeling of deep affection. Now, a lot of us confuse love with passion and intimacy. And I'll meet in the middle. That's a form of love. That's not love in its purity. And it's only when we truly learn to love ourselves that we now can truly love other people. Fully, completely, entirely. And then forgiveness. Stop feeling angry or resentful. So we just talked about eliminating, right? Stop feeling angry or resentful toward someone for an offense. What gets offended? An ego. Flaw or mistake. The path out is acceptance, love, forgiveness. It's as basic as it's going to get. That's where I started. When I learned this information, I took it upon myself to look at everyone in my life, and my goal was, I don't want a single person in my life that there's something negative left. And so I began clearing that up one by one by one. And I'm talking a meaningful one-on-one conversation, not villainizing the other person, taking responsibility for myself and what I caused and my power to create this relationship. And it was my lack of power that caused whatever negativity there was between whatever individual I had to clear up with. And so I started with acceptance. I came from a place of love, and I forgave. Ironically enough, it wasn't even forgiving the other person. It was forgiving myself for even causing the situation with the other person. And again, very powerful. Now, a little foreshadow into what I'll get into a little bit. I got so far with this. And then there was something that I needed that was a little bit more of a push to get me to truly accept, love, and forgive the last crucial area of my life. That was one of the best feelings I've ever experienced. And I will get to that, and I will share that in just a few slides. So we talked a little bit about levels of consciousness. And so what I learned from Power vs. Force, great book, Frequency, great book. I learned about kinesiology. And to put it simply, it's a numerical measure of a state of consciousness. And when you're in a state of consciousness, it's not like, oh, I'm in acceptance and I'm there 24/7. No, we fluctuate through these states of consciousness. And you can see at the top, enlightenment, and I'm sure we're probably familiar with that word to some degree. It's considered the ultimate, level of consciousness. And then you see the bottom ones: pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, shame. These lower levels of consciousness. And what I find that these come through a place of surviving, a place of survival. It's meant to protect ourselves. And it's very effective. We're here. Tens of thousands of years ago, we didn't have society as we know it. We actually were surviving. A lot of it was against ourselves, which, again, seems like we're still going through a little bit of that, but, heavily defending against ourselves, knowing what tribe to trust, what tribe not to trust, right? These group mentalities, these collective egos. Our group is different than your group. And then we fight over that. I think something, you think something different. And then we fight over that. Right? Or, we were just out in the wild, and there was tigers and bears and leopards and cheetahs and actual animals that we were surviving from. Right? And it works out very, very well, right? We're still here. We survived. Now, where the challenge lies is that we're still acting from a state of survival, even though we're not surviving today. And our definition of survival, especially in first world countries, is not surviving. It's not life or death. Most people, especially in this country, which I'm in, US of A, we're not surviving. And it's crucial to understand that to get to a place of thriving, to a place where you can get to these positive levels of consciousness. And if you actually enjoy the feeling of anger, fear, grief, if that's enjoyable, there's something to look at there. There's a lot of pain there that you need to keep feeding. If you think those are just part of life, they are part of life. They don't need to be as big of a part as we give. And what I started to do is I would study these maps, and there's various, they're all more or less the same. There's little nuances between different maps of consciousness. However, you're going to notice a consistency, especially where acceptance is, where love is, where joy, where peace is. You might have slightly different numbers, but when I say slightly, you might see a 450 love instead of 500. And then you look at how they're described, what does that mean? And then come from that place, put that on. And for me, it was a strive to work my way up the ladder, so to speak, work my way up off the levels, so to speak. And it was, okay, well, like we talked about earlier, acceptance was a key thing. And so I got to acceptance. And then I looked and I said, well, the next is love. Okay. Well, if I'm coming from a place of non-dualism, and if I believe that I am everyone and everyone is me, so there's only a we, there's only an us, well, then I can't love just certain people. I have to actually love everyone. All right? To love everyone is to love ourselves. Same with joy, same with peace. And so this was a stretch. This was something to continuously strive for. It is something to continuously strive for. It's a lot like working out. You don't get to your goal and then just stop and just stay there. Believe me, it doesn't work that way, because 6 months of no gym through COVID, I got some work to do to get back to where I was. And it's the same thing here. It's a mental workout versus a physical one, something that we don't seem to put a lot of value in this world. But it most certainly is a workout, most certainly comes with challenges, and it never stops. It's beyond rewarding, though. I will say that. And so a tool that helped me to get there, this was so beneficial for quieting the noise, getting to mind to stop. My mind used to think so much that when I became of age and started going out on the weekends and started drinking, I always had a good time. I do it for fun. I also did it, though, because it helped quiet my mind. Now, thankfully, I never used it as that vice. However, I certainly enjoyed the intake of alcohol for that benefit, just to quiet my mind. Now, I can do that without alcohol, and I do that without alcohol. I actually don't even drink that much nowadays. I'll sip on a drink for like 2 hours now. It's just not a big deal for me. And it started with meditation. Now, presence, the state or fact of existing, occurring, or being present in a place or thing. So presence and awareness go hand in hand. They're interchangeable to each other. Synonyms, you can say. So awareness is being present in the moment. And when you're present, you see more, you hear more, you get more. We can't do that, though, when we're in our head and we have a judgment, or we have a thought that's already in the way. So now we can't even hear what's being said to us, or we can't actually see what's in front of us. So meditation. Think deeply or focus one's mind for a period of time in silence or with the aid of chanting for religious or spiritual purposes, or as a method of relaxation. That's what I'm going to focus on, that part right there. Because when I meditated, it wasn't to think deeply. I do enough of that. It was to quiet the thought. And that came back to awareness. I would focus on being aware of my thoughts, be aware of the thinking. And so I started meditating for a couple minutes. And when I say a couple minutes, I mean a couple minutes, 5 tops. And again, like working out, maybe even like having one of those hand grips, hold it as long as I can, It's like, whew, you got to build up strength. And I do that with my mind. Keep it quiet. And then, you get bored. You're just sitting there. Right? That's why most people don't like meditating. They get bored. And I started from that, trying to get the 5 minutes of just quiet. And it was a wonderful thing. And so I would meditate a couple times a week. And I would keep pushing and pushing. Can I get to 15 minutes? Can I get to 20 minutes? And I would set alarms because I would realize that I'm thinking about the time. You know, when's the next appointment? What do I have to do? So I would set alarms so I knew I was safe, and I would trust myself to not worry about keeping track of time. And speaking of time, something fascinating happened when I really started quieting my mind and not thinking. And when I became more present, it got very difficult to keep track of time. Time became more of an illusion. The minute, 30 minutes, an hour. And that happened through progression in meditation, because I got to 30 minutes and then I got to an hour. And then pretty soon I would stop meditating and I could hold it. Get in my car, still no thought. And after a couple of days, I got to the point where I would actively think so I could actually see the difference, to show myself that I hadn't been thinking. Now, coming from a place where I had to search on the internet is overthinking a thing. Coming from a place where drinking would aid in quieting my mind, it was something for me to see that, wow, I went a day and there was no chatter. And then to come from a place where I would try to think just to hear my voice again, to realize that I wasn't thinking this whole time. And so now I carry that on. Now I'm at the point where, you know, do I still have the capability of thinking? Yes, it happens. You know, a day before this presentation, like I said, I got a little upset. It's the most I've thought in one day in a while, a couple of years. It's still there. Like, things can still happen, but the frequency is, you know, just pales in comparison. And on a normal day, if I don't get rattled, which is 99% of the time, I'm not thinking for probably 90% of every day. And it's a very peaceful place to be. And it's something that I believe is obtainable from every single person. And it's the lack of that I believe causes so much issues in the world, we'll say, or problems. Now, this is a really, really deep slide, and I'm not going to go all into it. I'm not going to unpack everything, because it's not just what I've learned in ontology. It's how I learned it and where I learned it from. And so unlike the other material that was from just reading books after book after book after book, and as you can see on the slides, I put the key ones there, but there was many other books on consciousness that I read, and human behavior. And, you know, I became a self-improvement junkie. But on ontology, I learned this through a very, very, very powerful program. And it wasn't just teaching ontology. It was teaching it in action. And I mean, I really could go on for hours just on this one thing, because so much came from it. And because it's put together through a program, and there's other sub programs that you can take. And it's just such a high level course. And it's definitely for people that are up to something in their life. If you want to know more about it, I'll have my information at the end of this. Ontology, as you can see, the branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being. 2, the set of concepts and categories in a subject, area, or domain that shows their properties and the relations between them. Simply put, the first one does a better job of it's a study of being. And a couple things that I'll give you that I took away from this was, first off, just language. How important language is. And how much we actually don't hear from another person, and how much we're not even aware of ourselves. And there's so many different distinctions that are learned throughout this program and throughout ontology. It's helped in so many ways. And I mentioned earlier that there was one piece left on my path to accepting, loving, and forgiving. And that was clearing up things with my father. So Long story short, we didn't have the most harmonious relationship. 16 years we went not speaking. It was a very deep, sad, angry, emotional circumstance of my life. And what I got clear on with learning ontology, being in this course, really getting to understand the nature of our being is, for one, I told a lot of stories to myself about him. And I learned that there's what happens in life and there's a story we tell ourselves about what happens in life. And our mind doesn't know the difference. They're both equally real for us. And then I also was able to put myself in his life and what it must have been like for him, learning all these things that characterize our being and how we go through life and how we handle trauma and how it develops into the life around us. Thought to myself, what about his life? I don't really know what he went through or how his childhood was, or, all the things that he's dealt with. And there's no training on this in the mainstream part of the world. Mainstream. So going to school, interacting with friends and family. What's the next step? Go to college, or then you get a job, or you get your career. There's no training for this unless you're in this course. And again, an amazing course. And so I got to see the world of things. I got to see the world of people, and I got to just speculate on what his world could have been, or what it must been, or there was obviously things there that he went through, and I never gave that any thought. It was just all about me and how I felt hurt. And so I was able to pick up the phone and give him a call and clear things up and be true to where I have been inauthentic, be true to myself on what I was pretending, and I was pretending that I was okay, that I had grown enough mentally, that if I were to see him, I would have been fine. And that was a lie. I wasn't okay. Things have not been cleared up, and the truth was it affected me in so many ways of life. It affected me with every relationship. What do I mean by that? Romantically? No, every relationship, whether it was with my mother, whether it was with my family, whether it was with friends, whether it was with just people out in the world, every relationship, because I had this guard up. I had this barrier, and I would keep people at different distances from actually being vulnerable. I kept people from me. And so on the phone call with him, 24-minute call, it was awesome. We really got to clear it up in 24 minutes. And then later after, we scheduled a time to meet, and we talked for 3 hours, and it was great. It was really good to be able to be with him. And a lot of this course and a lot of this work is about inventing possibilities. And the possibility that I invented and created with him was for him not to be my enemy. That's how he was for me. And I didn't want that. I didn't want that for myself. I didn't want that for us. Again, getting into his world, what it must feel like to have a child have that much anger towards you. I don't believe anyone deserves that. And I'm sure there's an example someone can give that defies that. I don't believe anyone deserves that indefinitely. When is enough enough? Was I just to hate him forever? What does that do? That keeps me down. It prevents me from actually having a true sense of love for myself and other people. Prevents me from allowing people fully into my life. It affects me from not having the trust for people because of that. And in inventing and creating that possibility, a whole world's opened up where now I can communicate with my father. And I can be out into the world and just have this freedom. And the real magic came from when I shared what actually transpired. So there's such a power in sharing, which is what I'm doing now, right? I'm sharing. And there's such a power in that, because if you cannot talk about something, I promise you are not okay with it. And it's how you talk about things that is a big indicator on how you feel. There is a lot in tonality. There's, I have people that call me and within 15 seconds, I already know how their day is going. I already know how they're feeling. I can already hear it, good or bad. The best is when it's a great experience. First 10, 15 seconds, I can already hear the person's lit up. I'm excited for the call. And if it's the other way around, I'm already gearing up to be able to add value the best I can to help that person out of that. And so I really want to touch on sharing. So after the phone call I had with my father, I was on the last full day of the course, and I was so excited to share, what had happened, that I was able to clear this up. I mean, again, we're talking years of pain and suffering and sadness and anger and resentment. Clear it up in 24 minutes. And I went up to go share in front of the class. We're looking at, let's say, 100, give or take, people. And now on the phone, emotional level, let's say from 1 to 10, was like a 4. And so again, I was pretending. I had thought that, yes, it was emotional. And I thought that I was handling it at a level where, yeah, I was okay. That I was already close to being healed. And yeah, that phone call was great. And I was a little emotional on the call, but, for the most part, it was great. I was okay. And then I went to share the conversation, how it went. And, I got through the part of what I said to him. And then I encountered the part of what he said to me. And speaking it out loud and sharing it, something about that made it real. As if the phone call didn't really land. Something about sharing it made it real. And as I explained earlier, when I had this involuntary feeling of happiness and joy with the modalities I learned from Eckhart Tolle, well, in this scenario, I had an involuntary feeling of not being able to speak. I physically couldn't even say what he said to me at that moment. And I remember stepping back, and I stepped back up, and I go to say it again. And I was just stuck. I couldn't say it. And then a moment of eruption where 20 plus years of childhood pain just came up from out of me all at once. And it was like this mile-long vine that was just saturated with thorns just being ripped out of me. And I, was probably a muscle away from falling to the ground. It was just done, lost it. Right? So we go back to that emotion scale, and now, the scale irrelevant at this point. I was just done. And that is when I learned what real healing is. And it was the most freeing experience of my life. I physically felt lighter. And I felt like a whole new space in my mind opened. And then when I recovered, a few minutes after, I was able to finish my share and be complete with that. And now we have an open line of communication, which I love. And it's just amazing, just in the world, what opened up from that. And I mean, life's just been great ever since. And, I had a coaching call not too long ago where I admitted that, a lot of times I'll actually downplay how happy I am. because at times if it can make someone else feel bad. I know most people aren't in that state of mind, and I'm not here to brag in any way, shape, or form. I do have a desire, a commitment, a dedication to help others have that same experience as much as I can for as long as I'm here. So, again, I could go on and on and on because there's so many distinctions, there's so many tools, there's so many ways to go about in this. I thought, though, I would just share the biggest moment that I had, and by far not the only moment. Other moments have been about just what has opened up in the world with communication, what I've been able to grow upon, what I've been able to accomplish. I mean, there's just so much more to the course, to this work. It may sound like it's just all about healing past traumas. That's a piece of it. But then past that, then it's about being out in the world, creating and accomplishing and performing and just having a limitless potential. So we will transition into another great book that I read, Deviate by Bolato, world-renowned neuroscientist, entrepreneur, two-time TED speaker. He takes us on a tour on how we perceive the world and how disrupting it leads to us creating and innovating. And so this book, it's so great because a lot of the earlier stuff is about the non-tangible consciousness, spirituality, metaphysics of being. And this brings it back down to neuroscience, the study of the brain, how things work, right? Chemically, physically. And it's a fascinating book. And this book I'll summarize as well. And if I could summarize it in one word, it would be perspective. This book gave a lot of confirmation to the other material. And it's so fascinating to see how much science, along with these other metaphysics, really complement each other. And so this was a great book to share how much perspective of the world we don't see, literally do not see, and how being exposed to that and being aware of our limitations of what we don't see and shaking up our paradigms on how we see the world can lead us to, as it says in the last line, create and innovate. So the book, again, is really all about perspective, how the brain works, how it talks to itself, right? The different areas of the brain, and how, it gives a lot of examples of illusions, which someone who I admire a great deal, Neil deGrasse Tyson, says, a set of optical illusions, they should be called brain malfunctions, because that's really what's happening. Our brain is having a malfunction, an error, a breakdown. It can't compute. Right. So really great book. I would definitely recommend checking it out. And lastly, a universal truth. What does that mean? What are the circles for? So I'll use the example of gravity. Gravity has always been and always will be, except for the extreme beginning of the universe and possibly the extreme end of the universe. For the most part, the other 99.99999% of the time, it's always been. And then one day, we understood how it worked. And we put it together in an equation. It was always there. We finally figured it out. And so in a universal truth, what I was looking for as I went through this material, as I went through these courses, as I began working with people, I was looking for not who was right. I was looking for what works. What is describing us? And where I can take that out into the world and see that replicated time after time after time after time after time, unanimously. Right? What is that universal truth? It's there. We're just figuring ourselves out. Right? We've always behaved how we've behaved. You know, even with the development of psychology, what were we doing? Studying our behavior, figuring out what always was, just so we can put some language to it, so we can understand ourselves better. And so that's what I did. I went through all these different areas: consciousness, neuroscience, metaphysics, psychology, religion. And speaking of that, I do have to give an honorable mention, because something I picked up from going to church that really stuck with me, and it was such a great message and such a short statement, was learning how to receive. And that was a big thing for me. So you look at all these circles, and these circles just represent different areas of truth. Again, whether it's just studying consciousness, whether it's neuroscience, whether it's religion, whether it's one of 1,000 religions. And then somewhere in the middle of that, there's a consistency. There are things there that you can put together that seem to work 100% of the time, seem to explain things 100% of the time. And that's what I focused on. Again, with Eckhart Tolle, I learned a distinction of modalities, and I took that out in the world. I took ego and how people respond and getting offended, and I took that out into the world. Took things like awareness, I took that out into the world, and it's easy to test because there's people all over, and I look for what works 100% of the time. What describes us 100% of the time? And so those are the key points that I went through in this presentation, and that's what these circles represent. If it was to scale, there'd be thousands of circles for all the different areas of explanations that we have on ourselves. And I was concerned with the center. What overlaps? What is everyone saying? What do we keep on saying, but we're not listening because we're too focused on who's right, this way's right, or this religion's right, or this is the truth. I wasn't concerned with all that. I just wanted to see what works. And I leave it open to interpretation at all times. I don't claim to have a conclusion. This is where I've gotten thus far. And I continue to keep my mind open for new and expanding information. And do I believe there's ever going to be a true conclusion? Absolutely not. That's an insult to the universe at large for us to try to contain that in our little minds. But again, like the gym, it's just a constant practice, a constant stretching, a constant growing, a constant working out. And this is just working out our mind. And it will literally change your life and the reality within it. So that's my time. Thank you for joining me. You have a link to my blog, a link to my videos, which this video is already on. So if you're here, you already got the link there. And please send me any questions. I don't have my email on here, so I'll put my email, or you know what, I'll add it on the slide to follow this, and reach out. Because if you got this far, then you're looking for something. And so whether it's you want more information, whether you want to have access to that program I was talking to, or whether you're interested in one-on-one coaching, which is something that I offer, reach out. Let me know. There's no me without you. And I'll leave you with this. We keep doing these same things over and over again. We keep getting caught in these generational cycles. As human beings, we're living these same recycled stories over and over again. And if we continue to not put value on ourselves and on mental health and on mental growth and about understanding our being and how we operate and who we are, then we're going to just stay inside this cycle. We're going to keep having the problems we see in the world. We're going to keep having divorce rates of 50+%. We're going to keep having these family arguments and disputes and bad breakups and all this stuff, and then pass it down to our kids, who passes it down to our kids, who passes it down to our kids. And well, we're now the kids. that got passed down from. When we heal ourselves, we're healing a part of the world. And so my request to you is send me an email and let me know what's there for you. What did you get out of this presentation? What do you want moving forward? What value can I give to you? Thank you for watching and have a great life. And remember, it starts with I and it ends with we. Peace on earth is a possibility. It just takes everyone to be involved. It's only when we're truly working together that we will have the world that we all truly want. Because it's only when everyone wins that everyone wins. What a concept.